If you feel like you have to stay, explain, fight to be understood, or hold on to someone who disturbs your peace, then you haven't reached this level yet. Because the moment a man truly understands his value, he stops holding on, and he starts walking away. And not out of anger, not out of ego, but from something far more dangerous, clarity. And once a man reaches that level, everything in his life begins to change. There comes a point in a man's journey where staying costs more than leaving, where holding on begins to feel like self-betrayal, where explaining himself feels like lowering his standard, and where the version of himself he used to be no longer fits the life he is building. And this is where Carl Jung pointed towards something deeper, that individuation is not just about becoming aware of who you are, it is about having the strength to remove what no longer aligns with it. Because awareness without action keeps a man trapped. And this is where most men hesitate. This is where they pause. This is where they try to fix what is already misaligned, and this is where they lose themselves again. Because walking away is not just physical, it is psychological, it is emotional, it is identity-level separation from what no longer reflects your truth. And here is the part most men don't want to face. You were never struggling to leave. You were struggling to let go of the version of yourself that needed that situation to feel complete. And that is why it feels difficult. Not because it is right to stay, but because something in you is still attached to what it represents. A man spends his early life learning how to hold on to attention, to validation, to relationships, to people who give him just enough to stay, but never enough to grow. He learns to tolerate, to adapt, to negotiate his worth in exchange for connection. But the man who begins to awaken begins to see this clearly. He begins to recognize the patterns, the compromises, the silent self-abandonment that once felt normal. And this is where everything shifts, because now the question is no longer, how do I keep this? The question becomes, why am I still allowing this? And the moment that question becomes real, walking away becomes inevitable. Because the sovereign man does not measure relationships by how much he feels, but by how aligned he remains within them. And this is the first law. A man walks away when his peace is threatened, not because he is cold, but because he is clear, because he understands that his nervous system is not something to gamble with, that his internal stability is the foundation of everything he is building, and that any connection that requires him to lose that is already costing him too much. And this is where most men get pulled back in, because the familiar still feels strong, because the emotional memory still speaks, because the attachment still whispers. Maybe this time it will be different. This is where everything either repeats or transforms, because not everything you feel comes from truth. Some of it comes from the past. Some of it comes from the version of you that learned to survive, not the version of you that is learning to lead. And this is where Jung's shadow work becomes real, because the things you are drawn to often reflect the parts of you that are still unresolved, the chaos, the intensity, the unpredictability, the emotional highs and lows. They feel alive, but they are not aligned. They are familiar, and familiar is not the same as right. So the sovereign man does something different. He does not follow every feeling. He does not chase every connection. He does not confuse intensity with meaning. He steps back, he observes, and he chooses based on alignment, not attachment. And this is why he walks away, not because the other person is wrong, but because he is no longer the man who was right for that dynamic. And that requires something most men avoid: silence. Because explaining feels safer, arguing feels active, defending feels justified. But silence requires certainty. Silence requires self-trust. Silence requires the ability to stand in your decision without needing validation from the other side. And this is where the sovereign man separates himself completely. He does not argue his worth. He does not defend his standards. He does not try to be understood by someone who is committed to misunderstanding him. He simply removes himself and lets his absence speak. And here is the deeper layer. The reason he can do this is because he has something greater pulling him forward. Because a man with no mission stays. He negotiates. He tolerates. He delays the inevitable. But a man with purpose cannot remain in environments that distort his clarity. Because every moment he stays misaligned, he feels it in his energy, in his focus, in his direction. Because this is where most men realize it was never just about the relationship. It was about the life they were not fully stepping into. Because when a man begins to rise, life removes what anchors him to his past, not as punishment, but as preparation. And walking away becomes part of that preparation. And when he finally does it, something shifts immediately. His energy returns, his nervous system settles, his thoughts become clearer, his body relaxes, his direction sharpens, because he is no longer divided. And this is the transformation most men never reach. The moment where choosing yourself no longer feels selfish. It feels necessary. Because he now understands something at a deeper level, that staying in misalignment is not loyalty. It is self-abandonment. And once a man sees that clearly, he cannot unsee it. Because the truth is, walking away is not a single moment. It is a series of internal decisions that build over time. It is the moment you stop explaining yourself when you feel misunderstood. It is the moment you stop overextending your energy to maintain something that no longer feels mutual. It is the moment you notice your body tightening, your thoughts becoming restless, your peace being disturbed, and instead of ignoring it, you listen. And that listening becomes the beginning of separation. Most men override these signals. They stay longer than they should. They rationalize what they feel. They tell themselves to be patient, to give it more time, to try again, to communicate more clearly. But deep down, they already know. The signal was there. The clarity was there. But the courage had not fully arrived yet. And this is where the real work happens, not in the external action of leaving, but in the internal alignment that makes leaving inevitable. Because once a man becomes fully honest with himself, once he stops negotiating with his own intuition, once he stops silencing that inner voice that says, "This is no longer for you," the decision makes itself. And when that moment arrives, it is quiet. There is no drama, no explosion, no need to prove a point, just a calm, grounded knowing that it is time. And this is what makes it powerful. Because the man who walks away in chaos is still reacting. But the man who walks away in calm has already detached. He is not leaving to get a reaction. He is not leaving to make a statement. He is not leaving to punish. He is leaving because internally he already has. And once a man reaches that state, there is nothing left to negotiate. Because he is no longer trying to change the situation. He has already changed himself. So if you are at that point where something in your life no longer feels aligned, where your peace is being disturbed, where your clarity is being questioned, understand this. The discomfort you feel is not confusion. It is truth trying to surface. And the question is no longer whether you should walk away. The question is whether you trust yourself enough to do it. Because that moment, that decision, is the line between the boy who holds on and the man who chooses himself. And once you cross that line, you don't go back. Chop wood, carry water, and let's keep the fire burning.